Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to this afternoon's session. And we're going to be looking at access and identity architecture and how we can control access with our environments. I do a lot of work these days with, my speciality is Active Directory, but Active Directory is spanning absolutely everywhere. And suddenly all these IaaS servers are popping up and people are coming into our organization. And how are they gaining access? How are we controlling that access? We can't leave it to the developers to make the decisions. So it's really important that it's an IT administrator, IT security architect, that we actually need to work with the developers to make sure that we're remaining secure. And what I want to do is look at, I think, one of Microsoft's biggest secrets, Authorization Manager. How many of you are using Authorization Manager? Okay, just a few hands. Authorization Manager is amazingly useful. Whenever I ask the product team, what is Authorization Manager, they look at me in horror, because I've been using it for a number of years now, and it's like, why is this guy asking this question? Because it's rather strange. What it really is just a .NET assembly. It's there already, okay? We just need to enable it in our applications, and we need to control what we put into its store. And then we can authorize access to systems using Authorization Manager. So really, what was it? To come along with a desire to learn about AZ-MAN, access-based authentication and authorization. And you need sort of the basic concepts around authorization and access control. But I'm just going to cover those off in a few moments as well. So I'm going to basically introduce the ideas behind security principles and the principles that can come into our organization. So we're probably all familiar with Windows principles, and in terms of security, how is a Windows principle identified? By a SID. Yes, well done. So it's identified by a SID. But what about those guys that come in and those girls that come in through forms authentication? All right? And there are various mechanisms that we can gain entry into our systems. And we need to look at those and address those as well. Then I'm going to talk about role-based access control. And one of the solutions to that is actually Authorization Manager, or AZ-MAN, as it's referred to. It's also referred to as RBAC, as in role-based access control. And when I think of Authorization Manager, I call it R² back. The reason being, not only is it role-based, it's also rule-based. But I want to look at the issues around how we make authorization decisions. Look at auditing. Auditing is really, really important these days. You know, who is gaining access to what? And when did they gain access? So we need to be able to audit access. We're going to look at application groups and scopes and all the sort of added bits and pieces that we can use with Authorization Manager. And Authorization Manager works off a store. That store can be in a simple XML file, or it can actually be an Active Directory, or as an alternative to that, we can put it in Atom. And with 2008, we can actually put it into SQL as well, where we store all the information about the authorization within our organization. And we'll look at just getting Atom up and running. So lots and lots of demos as we go. I've got a written little application which actually shows all the features of AZ-MAN and how we're going to get authorization working. Oh, just some legal stuff. We always have this slide. It's basically, whatever I tell you, don't do it directly into a production environment. I'm very happy that the information we give you is the correct information, but you always need to test. You know, you always need, when you get a product from Microsoft, you always test it before you put it into production, so just be careful. Also, just to mention, we've got a new seminar company starting next year, so XT seminars, so lots of interesting seminars. Raphael's involved in this as well, so if you like Raphael's presentations, we're going to be doing some joint presentations, and he's going to be doing some of his own as well. Okay, nuts and bolts. We have this person, Maria, sitting on client 1, who's going to access server 1. The first thing is we need to authenticate, which is identifying who you are. The next thing is the authorization component. And this is basically checking, now that we know who you are you allowed access? right? And if that's a web server in there, or it's a way, somehow this guy over here, or Maria, has got to gain access into our environment. And likely it's going to be a web server of some kind. So we can go for a trusted system, or we can go for an impersonation model. Okay? With a trusted system, resources are accessed by the identity of the web account. That's the account running the web pool. So we control access for that account, right? So it's up to the application to control access for the user. So when we're designing this type of system, a trusted system, what we've got to do in terms of, if we put our security hats on, looking after the infrastructure, is we've got to provide the maximum level of access that the application will ever want. And we give that access to the application pool account. Right? Then it's down to the application to authorize. The alternate is to use the impersonation model. And in the impersonation model, we impersonate the user that's coming in. Now, we can do that with a Windows identity. And we've been allowed to do delegation for a while on Windows identity, provided the front-end authentication has been via Kerberos. Between our IIS server and back-end systems, it's always got to be Kerberos. But up until Windows 2003, it had to be Kerberos coming in at the front end as well. With Kerberos 2003, we can do all sorts of clever things like constrained delegation. We can also do protocol transition. So therefore, someone could come in through forms authentication, or someone could come in through NTLM authentication, or digest, lots of different ways of coming in, or even coming in through a smart card authentication of some kind, and we can transition the protocol to Kerberos to go to the back-end systems. Right? What I'm talking about today is trusted subsystems, is the application actually doing the authorization. If you're interested in Kerberos, protocol transitioning, constrained delegation, I'm doing a session tomorrow afternoon. And that is really, if you really want to know how to get your web apps running with Kerberos at the front end, there's lots of little gotchas that you need to get around. And if you want to work out how transitioning happens, again, we need to have certain things in place. And we're going to go through all of that tomorrow. And if you are using delegation in your organization, it's potentially really dangerous, right? Because if I'm running 2003 model and I allow protocol transitioning to take place, I can actually transition to any user. I don't need their username and password. So I could say, OK, I'm going to be transitioning to the administrator, and that's the domain administrator. And that can happen. Therefore, we need to understand it to impose the correct security. So if you're interested in that, come back tomorrow. We're going to focus in on our trusted subsystem. So here we've got server 1, and server 1 is going to authenticate and authorize onto its own resources, and then it's going to go off to the back-end system, to server 2. Now, if we're talking about a trusted subsystem, what we've got running on server 1 is an application pool with an identity. An identity is just a user account, effectively. And when that goes to the back-end system, it's going to go with that identity. So in terms of authentication, coming in at the front end, we could use Windows or integrated authentication. We could use and authenticate against ADAM, Active Directory Application Mode, or as it's now called, anyone know the new name? ADLDS, Lightweight Directory Services. So if you see people talking about ADLDS, they're really talking about ADAM, but it's got a few extra bits and pieces, but not a lot, to be honest with you. It's very, very similar, and it's ADLDS in Windows Server 2008. Another way we could come in is we could come in with ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services, in which case we're going to be presenting claims at our front end. We could come in with SQL authentication, or we could come in with some other custom authentication that you write yourselves. It's quite possible for an application to call out to an HTTP module, and then you can write that to go off and, send a message somewhere else and say, authenticate this person. The message comes back and says, yeah, he's OK, and he's into the front end. When it comes to authorization, what we need to do is create rules. We need rules as to why someone is allowed access to something. And that's where it can actually become quite tricky. So in terms of the authenticated principal, we can come in, there's Maria. She could log in, and that little dialog up there, probably a Windows authentication, but it's just been thrown up by IE for us, and it's not very informative. So a lot of organizations don't like people actually logging in with the top dialog. So they will drop down and use forms authentication. And forms authentication, of course, you design it yourself. You can put anything you like on it. And when someone logs in at that, they've got more confidence that they're actually going to the resource they expect. Whereas that top dialog, are you really going where you expect to go? I mean, I know it says, it actually tells you what the domain is at the top, but is it really coming from where you expect? So having got in there, how are we actually going to identify that user? Well, if we're using Windows authentication, then we could do it from a local accounts database if we wanted to on the IIS server, or we could do it from the Active Directory. So now we come in and we're authenticated the Windows user. Alternatively, if we're using forms, we can use an AD connector. So the AD connector goes into the Active Directory and authenticates the user using the security principal in the Active Directory. Or we could go to Adam, or we could go to SQL, or we could go to some other custom database. Or you could do it from a file if you wanted to. You could have a file, and you've got usernames and passwords in that file. The important thing is that if you authenticate as Maria against AD using the Windows authentication, she is a Windows security principal. If you authenticate against the AD using the AD connector from Forms, she's a Forms principal, and she's not the same person. And people always have this problem in SharePoint. Anyone experienced that? Anyone got Forms authentication into SharePoint, which has got an AD connector? Anyone using that at all? Okay, well, it always mystifies a lot of customers I work with. They set that up, and then people come in through Forms, and they're different people. So if they log in through a Windows dialog, right? Because although you're identified in Windows using a SID, you're actually identified by a unique binary ID, which is not a SID if you've come in through Forms authentication. And FBA, which is down there, is actually forms-based authentication. Okay, if you're coming in through ADFS, then the idea of ADFS is that we can have two totally separate security identities or security realms. And we've got buyers and sellers, and they want to cooperate in some way. So we set up a federated trust between them. And that federated trust is basically saying, okay, buyers, if you send me a token which is signed by you, I will believe you have identified the person, and I will accept that identity. So what actually happens when somebody comes in from buyers across to the web server over there, the first thing that happens is we create a signed token. And that signed token has the user identity on it. So in fact, the user gets referred back. I'm not going to go into the details of ADFS. Did anyone come to my ADFS session earlier in the week? Great. OK, good. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for coming back. But basically, it's a signed token. And because we've got this federated trust, we accept that signed token. And on that signed token is the identity of the user plus claims. And in its simplest form, a claim is basically a group membership claim. And that claim is mapped to groups stored in the account database in buyers. Having received it, we probably want to change what the claims or how the claims represent things in our organization. So you can do a transformation at the ingress, and then it's presented to the web server. That is a very simplistic overview of ADFS, but it's roughly how it works. So somebody else is doing the authentication. So when we allow someone into our web server over on the seller side, it's actually buyers that's doing the authentication. So we've got resources, and we've got resources in our application. And one of the first key steps is for the designer of the application to identify security-sensitive resources. Right? Any developers here? Just 3 or 4. OK, so 4 of you, you've got to work very closely with everyone else to actually make this whole thing work. So you're going to identify these security-sensitive operations. And then best way of dealing with it is to have a role, have an order clerk. And that order clerk can create an order and review an order. Now, somehow, the developer of the application has to do an authorization check. So We need to know that somebody is in a particular role and they're actually allowed to do those two operations. Then you might have, an order manager that's allowed to do absolutely everything. And then you might just have an auditor, which is allowed to review the orders themselves. And that's what we want to end up with. But the trouble is, if it's left to the developers, what will happen is all of this could get hard-coded. So what happens if your roles change? All right? What happens if the mappings you want change? So we need to come up with a good authorization model. So in terms of managing roles, we could use Windows groups. Okay? So how many of you are AD administrators? Oh, probably less than a third of the audience. Okay? So if an application developer came up to you and said, how about creating all these groups for me? How would you feel? Happy? You'd be happy. You'd be happy to do it for them. Okay. No. There's a no, definite no from back there. I think there's a sort of maybes around as well. Okay, this is where problems arise. We use Windows groups, and we will use Windows groups to some extent, probably. There's this problem of response time. There's the problem of creating them, getting agreement between them, and so on. So we've got to have close collaboration between the AD administrators and the application developers. That's one area. The other thing is, how many SIDs can you have on a security token before you can't log on anymore? What's the maximum number of SIDs you can put on a security token? Well, it's go binary, just a little bit below that. What's a binary K? Binary K? 120. Oh, we've got lots of votes here. Who's going to be the tiebreaker? We've got someone from Microsoft here. Binary K? 1024, perfect. I did hear the answer back there as well. So yeah, 1024. But actually, it's already been pre-populated with a number of things anyway before that. And if you exceed that number of SIDs on your token, somebody can't log in anymore. It's a very nice classic attack against the directory. What you do is, if somebody can manage groups, they put the administrator account into 1024 groups, and the administrator can no longer log in. And you get a lovely dialogue from Microsoft. You can't log in, contact your system administrator. And you're going, but I am the system administrator. All right? So token bloat is actually a problem. All right? And especially if we've got exchange groups as well working. Before we know it, we're building these groups for managing access to the applications, and we've blown our token size out the water. So that's one of the penalties. Also, it doesn't automatically provide you with auditing when access is granted. So if I go and create an order, how's the group going to do that? It's not. That would be down to the application developer. The application developer would have to log that this group had created this order, right? And what would be better, in fact, if we knew the actual user who created it. So the application wants to know the user. You have to do a lot more work to find out that it was a particular user actually creating the order. So we'd like to audit all of those operations that have been defined. Also, Windows groups can't act as role groups for users who do not have Windows accounts. Fairly obvious statement, but if you think about it, you come in through FBA, so forms-based authentication, you don't have a Windows account, so we can't actually manage it through that. And if you start designing your own custom authorization code, it becomes very, very costly if you want to do it well. Right? And it's really important it's done well because you want good security in your organization. So if we're looking at a wish list of what we would like to gain, we want authorized access to operations based on a user's role. Okay, that is best practice. That's what we want to do. We also, basically, we want to store the authorization policy not in the application, but externally to the application so that it can be modified if we need to without having to go back and rebuild the app. Right? We want to take those rules out of the app and put them somewhere separately. Okay, so the application developer says, oh, I'll stick it all in a SQL database, and then how many days is it going to take to code it? All right, that's another issue. So it gets very, very expensive. It would be nice to have dynamic assignment of users to roles, all right, based on maybe if you're working with Active Directory, based on the fact they're working in a particular office. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just, they're in Barcelona and their office string is set to Barcelona, they automatically put into a particular role? That would be a useful feature to have as well. And another thing that would be very useful is to be able to put in some business rules. All right, we've got an order clerk. Wow, the order clerk's only just started. Do we want them to handle the £1 million orders? Maybe, maybe not. So it would be very nice to actually allow them to create an order, provided it's less than, say, £1,000. Right? When they're a bit better, we'll let them do it, provided it's greater than £10,000. And then when we really know they're good, we'll let them create the £1 million orders. So it'd be great to have business rules in our authorization policy. Right? So another thing would be good. We want to audit success and failure of the operation. So when someone creates an order, we want to know who created it, when they created it, and whether it's successful or failed. And also, if somebody changes the authorization policy, we want to be able to audit that as well. All right? So somebody from dev, how long did it take you to code that lot up? Quite a time. Yeah? Would you get it right first time? No, this is, well, sorry, that wasn't a reflection on your coding. But this is the thing. A lot of this sort of organically grows, and it grows over time, and then somebody leaves, and there's another developer, and he thinks, oh, it'd be better to do it this way, and better to do it that way. And this thing gets in a little bit of a mess, right? What would be better is to actually have a solution for this. And this is where Authorization Manager will come to the rescue. And as I said right at the beginning, I think Authorization Manager is Microsoft's best kept secret, because there's very few people that actually know about it. So if you do know about it and you're using it, that's great. Right? It is actually amazingly useful. So role-based access control. The developer defines the sensitive operations within his application. Right? Next job. It would be nice to be able to group those operations together. So if you need to place an order, what you'll be doing is maybe sending an email, approving it, and updating it. So we're actually placing the order with the supplier. Maybe if you're creating the order in the first place, then you need to get the order number, you create the order, you read the supplier's database so you can pull the supplier's information out. All right? So we've just created a task. Right? So our developer, sensitive operations, thinks out the tasks. Right? Probably we should start talking to the guys that are going to run the whole thing at this point in time as well and getting the collaboration. Then we create these roles. A dispatcher places the order. We've got a manager who can place orders and generate orders as well. And then we've got an order clerk who just generates orders. So there we've got our roles. But now we've got 3 tiers. All right? The operations, and when the web developer is going to check if someone's allowed to do it, they want to check the access on one of those operations. And then we build those into tasks. So, then we've got roles. So the dispatcher is allowed to send an email, approve an order, update an order, and of course the manager can do the whole lot. Now, there are 2 sort of ways of thinking about this. You could say that operations and tasks are defined by the developer. I don't believe it's quite as clear-cut as that, because what I like to do, in particular, anyone following the Security Development Lifecycle process, SDL? Okay, so SDL is a process whereby it helps you create secure applications. And what it's doing is you're reviewing security right at the point of starting to build the apps. If you're not looking at SDL, it's worth, there's a great book on the security development lifecycle written by Michael Howard. And if you're getting apps developed through your organization or you're developing applications, it's a must read, really, to really build you secure apps. Because the apps are going to expose you these days, right? The operating system is really pretty good now at authentication and authorization. The problems you have is in the application. So very important to get that in. So, but the way Authorization Manager thinks about it, it says, you know, tasks and operations are things developers set up. And then in terms of the actual role base, the role is going to be done by an administrator. So what Authorization Manager does, it basically is a solution for .NET and COM applications. It supports different identities, so we can use it with forms, we can use it with Windows, we can use it with ADAM security principles as well, or if you like, ADLDS security principles to bring it right up to 2008. And it stores the policy in a number of different types of stores, XML, right, AD, ADAM, or in 2008, you can store it in SQL. It's got a UI for managing the policy store. Okay, now that UI is improved. Again, it's improved in Vista, and it's improved in, it's the same one as in Vista in 2008. And what it does is allow you to manipulate ADAM security principles now in the UI. The one with the current version, 2003, basically allows you just to manage Windows security principles, right? But so you end up writing a bit of custom code. It allows you business rules, supports dynamic groups, has scopes, right? Runtime auditing. So this is actually as the operation's being allowed or denied, we can audit that. And also we can, the authorization store has auditing on it as well. So it logs all changes to the store, success and failure. So it sort of pretty much gives us what we want. So this is the architecture. We have Authorization Manager. And as I say, it's really a .NET module. So what we need to do is make sure we're using it. In fact, it's sort of sitting there ready to go. You can fire up the UI for Authorization Manager. Just go open up a blank MMC, add in Authorization Manager, and you can configure it. What the application needs to do is think about how to use it. So our application is going to have to initialize the store, first of all. So it needs to know where it is. So we created an XML, it needs to know the name of the XML file. Created an AD, it needs to know the location in the AD. We created an ADAM, it will need to know a little bit more. So port number it should be using as well. Having initialized the store, it opens the application policies. So in one store, we can store information from multiple applications. It then creates a context based on the ID of the user. So in Windows terms, what we do there is we would basically, we've got the, it's a Windows principal, we've got the Windows SID for the user, and then we've got all the group memberships. If it was an ADFS, we'd populate it with the claims. And then we go and make a call against AZMan and say, is this user, or any of the groups this user belongs to, in a particular role? So we can do a role check. Or we can do an access check and say, is this user, or any of the groups the user belongs to, allowed to perform this particular operation? So it basically gives us everything we want. So in terms of the authenticated users, as I say, we can use ADAM, we can use SQL authentication, custom authentication, but unless you're just doing it with Windows users, you're going to have to write some custom code to manage the user interface. Right? If you're in 2008, you can also use these ADAM principles. So identifying the allowed operations. There's the client context. We've got roles, we've got tasks, and we've got operations. And Authorization Manager is going to manage all of this mapping for you. And it could be that you're directly in a role, or you're in a role due to the fact you're in a group which has been placed into the role. So in terms of our store security, we create a store, and we need to administrate that store, but our application needs to be able to read the store as well. So we're going to have to manage the store security. And if we've got an XML store, so it's based on an XML file, that file is going to be in the file system somewhere, and it's going to be NTFS permissions that is actually going to manage access to it. Right? So those will have to be set up appropriately. The other thing is I see the XML file for the authorization store too often put in the website directory. Don't do it. This is an important store. If someone manages to hack into the website, they could hack into the store and make changes. You don't want that. All right? So put this somewhere sensible. Tuck it away in its own directory. Control access to it properly. Okay? So do be very careful about that. Right, so what I want to do now is actually, I'm going to take us through building ourselves a little environment with Authorization Manager. And what I would do if my machine hadn't gone to sleep, that's a good start. Let me just bring up, I've got a second power supply here. Let me just bring that up and put that in. So what I'm going to do in this demo is actually go through the process of creating an XML store. Having created the XML store, we'll also create operations on here. So let me just log in, won't be a second. And what I'll do is actually, I will put, again, I know you can't see at the moment, but I'm just getting myself reconnected to my servers. And as soon as I've done that, we'll be ready to rock and roll. So okay, so what I've got in this environment, so let me just switch over, is I have an application server and I have a domain controller. And that's all I'm using. I'm not bothering with a separate client. I'm actually going to go with the, yeah, that's good. Let me just reconnect again. This is being plagued this time. Connection server being lost. Connection connect. Right. What I have in this environment is I have an application server and I have a domain controller. And as I say, I'm not bothering with a client machine. I'm actually going to access it directly from this particular server. So my first thing I want to do is actually bring up AZMan. So coming in here, and I'm going to bring up a blank MMC. And this is on my application server. Let me just move that out of the way for the moment. And I go File, Add, Remove, Snap in. And I need to find Authorization Manager in here. So down here to Authorization Manager, bring him in. Okay, and having got Authorization Manager in, I can create myself a store. So I can, nothing's in there at the moment. So I can right-click and I go New, and I haven't got it. Now, there's these two modes you can run it in. There's developer mode and administrator mode, all right? And when we're in developer mode, what we're going to do is be allowed to create a new store. So I'm going to go in here, New Authorization Store, and I'm going to create this thing in its own directory, which is called AZMan in here. And I'm just going to call this AZ Store. So we're going to create this store, and it's going to be an XML store. Okay, so that's created. The next thing I need to do is, having created this thing, I need to actually create an application, because this store can hold multiple applications. So I'm going to go in here and go New Application, and I'm going to call this Authorization. So Authorization. Okay, so we're done. Our application can now use the store. So let's fire up the application. And before I do that, I just want to show you the web config file for this application. What I've got in here is AD store, and it's saying where the store is. So it's MS XML, and it's in the AZMan directory. It's called AD store azstore.xml. And then I've got the application name here, AZ application name authorization. The only thing, the other thing the application needs to know is about the assembly, so it can actually make calls into the store. So we need this line under assemblies, so we can now gain access to the AZ store. So let's fire up the application. So I'm going to log on as a user called Liz. And in we go in there. So it's because it's all just started up, it's got to crank itself up and get itself going. And very shortly, it will all be working. Okay, exception, H result, access denied. What do you think that is? No, it's not about roles, not about users. First thing we got to do is do what? Yes, it's got to be able to read the store. That's the first thing we've got to be able to do. So let's go back. We could, if we wanted to, change the permissions in the directory. But I don't want to do that. I'm going to use azman for this. So I'm going to come back up to the XML store, right-click, properties, security for the administrator. My administrator's in there. Okay, reader. Who's the reader? ASP.NET. Well, yeah, take it back to the identity. It's actually the identity of the application. And I'm running this under network services, or network service account. Okay, so I've got to add in the network service account in here. Okay, so the network service is now a reader of the store. Okay, right, having done that, let's just quickly look inside the file system and just have a look to see what's happened. So there's the store. Let's right-click it, properties, security, administrators, full, network services, read. So that by going through the interface, that's all it's done. It's just securing security within the NTFS file system. Right, so now let's go back here and give this guy another go. And up comes my little application. And by the way, I will put this application on the CD that comes out afterwards because it's quite a useful little application for working out what's going on. So current user, sellers, Liz. All right, that's a good sign. So it's identified our security principal that's logged in. What roles is Liz in? What I'm going to do is actually create a security context, which I will then pass to the store and say, what roles is Liz in? And the answer is none, because we haven't created any roles, so Liz can't possibly be any roles. Now, I've got a series of operations, create, read, update, and delete. If I access check those, it comes back and it says missing operations. Again, these are not defined in the store. So I need to define the operations as well. So let's go back to the store itself. And what I'm going to do is actually create an operation in here. And under here, we got definitions. So operation definitions, right-click on there, new operation. And we'll start off with create. And this is an operation that has been identified as a security-sensitive task within the application. So it needs a number to represent it, and you basically define it as a constant in the app itself. Okay, so we'll do, there's one operation. Let's create another operation, and we'll call this one read, and we'll give it the next number up, which is 101. And just to prove that that's working, let's go back to the application, access check. Well, two of them are in place. We're still missing the other two. So let's just put the other two operations in place. Now, new operation definition, so we got create, read, update, and that's going to be 102. And the last one is delete. So it's, as it's known as CRUD. So create, read, update, and delete. But anyway, so we're going to call this one delete, and operation number in there is 103. Okay, so now let's go back to the application, do an access check, and so it now knows that those operations exist in the store. But we haven't got anyone coming in. I mean, we're checking for Liz, but Liz isn't in any of the roles whatsoever. So our next job is actually, having done that, we need to actually create some tasks. So we now go into the task definition, and we go new task, and we've got a task here which is create order. And we've got, this is going to be defined in terms of operations. So click on add on there, and we come in operations, and the create order, what I want to do is create and read. So if I'm allowed to do that task, I can now create and read within the application itself. Okay? And having done that, we'll OK that one, and we'll do another one, and this is going to be change order. So it's a new task. I'm going to choose change order in here. And in here, what I want to do is I could define it in terms of another task or a series of tasks. So I can have tasks nested within tasks. But what I'm going to do here is in terms of change the order, I'm going to assign read, update, and delete. So read, update, and delete. OK. Right. Next level up is going to be my role definitions. So I'm going to go for a role definition in here, new role definition, and I'm going to go for manager. And manager is going to be, it tells you there are no roles defined the first time round, and we're going to define the roles in terms of tasks. So the manager is going to change order, create order. Okay, so that's done. And the other one is I'm going to actually have in here is an order clerk, and the order clerk is a new role in here as an order clerk, and add in, and again, we could define it in terms of other roles, but we're going to do in here, the order clerk is allowed to create an order. Okay, so things are beginning to look okay. So the next job is to assign Liz to one of those roles. And we do that down here under role assignments. We go right-click, assign roles. Let's make Liz a manager. So we've now got a role assignment of managers, and we go assign Windows users and groups. Now, if you're working with different claims and things like that coming in through ADFS, this is where you've got to customize the interface to actually handle this. So I'm going to assign a Windows user, and in fact, I'm just going to put Liz straight in there. So Liz is now a manager. Right. The application, access check. She's a manager, and she can do everything. All right, let's take her out of there. Access check. Can't do anything. She's not a manager. Let's assign another role in here. So we're going to make her an order clerk now. So let's assign Liz to being an order clerk. So assign a user, put Liz in there. And now Liz is an order clerk, and we do an access check. She can create and read, and we can see that she's an order clerk as a role. Now, you can actually, you can check the roles. You don't have to check the operation. So if I wanted to know what role someone is, I can go to AZMan and just say, what role is that person in? Right? Because we create this context first. Or I can do the access check. So I've got flexibility there. Now, what have you noticed in that what have you noticed that's different to Windows groups? Yeah, I don't have to log out and log in, do I? All right. So if I change a group membership for a user, I've got to log them off to rebuild their security access token. Here, I'm actually creating these roles, and I don't have to worry about, changing somebody's security access token. This is all being handled within Authorization Manager. Right. Let me just create one further role, and I'm going to call this the auditor role. And if you want, you don't have to, with the auditor, the role in here, if we go down to the auditor, sorry, right-click on there, properties, definitions, I can add a definition, and I don't have to put it into another role, I don't have to put it into another task. I can go all the way down to the operation if I want. So now I'm actually just allowing the auditor role straight onto an operation. Okay, so let's do a role assignment on there, assign roles, and I'm going to go to the auditor, okay, and just double-click this guy, and under here, So Windows application user, put Liz in there, and do an access check. She's still create and read because she's in both roles. So one role doesn't override the other role. It's an accumulation of the operations you got. So let's take her out of the order clerk option here. So delete her out of there, access check again, and we've got just the auditor role. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. So there's a lot of flexibility in the way we build this, but the key is actually we've got to be able to build this with collaboration between the people managing the system, the people allowing secure access to our corporate assets, because you may well be controlling access to your corporate assets, and the developers have got to work very closely on this to get this working. Okay, let me just go back to my slide deck. Okay, to start, give you a feel how Authorization Manager actually works, because you can read it to you below in the face, but actually until you see it in operation, it's actually very difficult to envisage it. Any questions at that point? Show the code that's used. I tell you what I'll do is I'll go there at the end if there's time. All right, but I will put it. It's a very simple application. I will actually put it on the CD. But let's see how we do for time, and if so, I'll go into the code, because some people will be interested in the code and others not. All right, so that's okay with you. Do you have a question?
Website going into, let's say, the Active Directory link in the company for backend service.
Okay, so no, so the question is about crossing boundaries. So coming into our IS site and then going out to backend systems, right? What we're doing here is we are basically using the application pool identity to gain access to all of our backend systems. Right? So when we go to a back-end system, we're authenticated using that identity. Right? So we control access to our back-end systems by controlling access on those based on the identity of the web application. Right? So we now extract information from that back-end system and pull it back to the web app. The web app is now going to say whether the person is authorized for that data. Right, so this is where we're talking about a trusted subsystem. If you want to do impersonation, then basically impersonation is handled very, very differently. So we impersonate the user. We're now running with the user's security context. We're not running with the user's security context here. What we're doing is the application is running with the application pool context. But if we did impersonation, we could go out from the web server, and we could go back to a back-end server using impersonation with delegation, right? And I'm going to cover that off in the security and the Kerberos and the protocol transitioning constrained delegation talk tomorrow. Okay. Okay, that was my demo environment just as a reminder, and that's the little application in here. I've got an access check in here, which is the access check, and it actually looks for an amount less than 1,000, but I'll come back to that shortly. Okay, in terms of auditing, we've got runtime auditing, so we know who gained access to a particular operation and whether they were allowed access or denied access. We've also got, in terms of authorizing store changes, if it's an XML file, you are basically constrained by the fact that somebody read the file. You know who read it, right? But not what they changed in it. And that's done purely through the object access auditing that comes in the file system. If it's AD, we can actually show the changes. Now, if it's AD today, we can see that the attribute has been changed. If it's AD in 2008 and we use DS directory services change auditing, we can see what the value was before the change and the value after the change. So there's new auditing, directory service auditing in AD with Server 2008. So you're going to get a much finer level of auditing. So in terms of group policy settings, if you want to enable auditing, remember you've got to have an audit policy, which is actually got switched on for audit object access, right? And if we're auditing changes within the store, and this store is held in Active Directory, then we need directory service access auditing on. And then we need to set the appropriate, in terms of set the appropriate SACLs, the system access control list, to say who should be audited for what in the directory or in the file system. So you end up, if you look in the audit log, you end up with a process identifier. So I'm running under network services, so it's network services that is actually going to the store, all right? We've got an object name. This is AZMan demo. Your developers can pass in any access request their own name. So they can actually specify a name that gets passed and gets logged, right? And then we've got the operation name, which is read, which was 101. You remember the integer value 101 I put in associated with read? And then the client name, who did it? So we've got auditing all the way back to the user's identity, right? Because Liz was in a role, which was in a task, which allowed access to the operation. But we've got the auditing that we need. So we can actually see exactly what Liz gained access in terms of the applications, operations, and the time, and so on. So now our application control audit access, there's actually rather more that comes with it. What we've got is the ability to create authorization manager groups, all right? And we can place users or Windows groups into that group. There's a nice little feature there, which is the ability of having non-members. So the example I've got there is I've got Liz, who's in new starters. She just started with the company. She's also in the sales team, all right? And we place the sales team and the new starters into an authorization manager group, right? And if she's in both, Liz is not in the role, right? The reason being, there's the role that we're going to place the senior sales into, and Liz will not be in there. But as soon as she comes out of the new starter group, she will be in that role. Right? So it's a nice little feature, being able to deny someone from a group. And of course, the denies actually take precedence on that. And then we can do dynamic groups. And with dynamic groups, what we've got with dynamic groups is the ability to build an LDAP query. So we can build an LDAP query, and if the query matches the criteria, that person is within the dynamic group. And I just want to do a very quick demo on these groups going on here. So I'll just go back over here and switch back to my machine. Right, so let's create ourselves, first of all, under groups up here. I'm going to create a group, so it's going to be a new application group. I've got two choices, basic or LDAP query. I'm going to start with a basic group, and I'm going to actually call this group all users. Okay, so we add that in. And then we're going to populate that group. So we're going to actually add the members in there. And I'm going to add in here, authenticated users. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is just check where do we got to here, auditors. Let's get rid of Liz out of auditors. And let's use audit clerk. So we're going to go assign, rather than Windows user group, we're going to assign an application group. And we're going to put all users in there. Right, let's do an access check. And there she is. She's in the order clerks, right, because she's an authenticated user. Right. Now, I'm not going to change the name of the group, but what we'll do is we'll go back to the group definition in here. So all users, properties, non-members. So we're going to add in here Liz. And I think it's fairly obvious what will happen. Access check. She's no longer in that role. So it's a very nice little feature. There's some extremely nice features in AZMan, which would be very nice if you saw in Active Directory. Of course, typically, it's this whole authorization piece is handled by a completely different team within inside Microsoft. But they've got some very, very good little features here. Let's go for another group. Let's go in here, new application group, and this time we'll go for an LDAP query. So we're going to go for an LDAP query group, and what should we call this? Paris users. So this is users in Paris. Okay, so now we right-click on there, properties. Let's go to the query. And when we construct the query, it's a standard LDAP query, and you can make it as complicated as you like. What I'm going to go for is the physical delivery, oops. Right, the physical delivery office name, which is actually the LDAP name that is well, it's the LDAP name of the attribute that's populated when you type something in the office string in the UI. So physical delivery office name equals Paris. Okay, so that's my LDAP query. If that's true, that person is in that particular role. Okay, so there's Paris. So let's just go down here again, and let's remove all users from that role assignment. And what should we have? I think we'll make everyone in Paris a manager. Okay, so we got the Paris users in here. Right, access check. No, Liz is obviously not in Paris, or I've got something wrong. So let's go and put Liz in Paris. So I'm just going to bring up Active Directory using computers in here. I'm going to drill down to my users. So drilling down into my users in here. And we've got sellers, users. There's Liz. Let's look at Liz's properties. And let's pop Liz into Paris. Okay, so back over here, access check, and she's manager's role. All right, and again, you know, there's none of this logging on, logging off bit to change your group membership. So those are two really nice features that come with, you know, just built into Authorization Manager. We've also got the capability of doing scopes. And basically, you could have a read operation which has different rules associated with it depending on a scope. And that scope could be location, it could be function, it could be anything you like. So basically, when you call into a Z-man, what it basically does, it allows you to pass a scope across to it. And then depending on the scope name and the scope definition that's defined, you will have a different set of rules. So if we look at that lot, the very top authorization is the name of the application. And that, if you like, is a global scope. So we can have a global scope that applies to everybody, and then we could have a scope for legal and a scope for finance, which changes things slightly. So if you had defined legal data, you could maybe read everything, but you were an auditor in all the other scopes. So it allows the operation to be, well, the access to that operation to be controlled based on a scope. So again, a nice add-on. Business rules. As I said right at the beginning, you may want to change your authorization depending on some values. Okay? So again, through to the authorization check, what we can do is we can pass a list of value names with their associated values. And then we can run a script. And if that script evaluates true, you're allowed to do that task. If it doesn't, you're not allowed to do that task. And we basically just, so we got order clerk, create order, create and read at the operations. And we basically click on here and select an authorization rule. And there's a little bit of VB script in there. So what it basically does here is I've actually got coming in here, I've got AZ BizRules context dot BizRules result equals false. All right? So if I return that, you are not in this particular, well, you're not allowed to do this particular task. So I then say amount equals AD BizRules context get parameter amount. And amount is something I've passed in the access check. So your developers can pass these values through in the access checks with value names. So we now say if amount is less than 1,000, then AZ business rule context, which is the context we're working in, dot biz rule result equals true, in which case you will actually be allowed to do it. Okay, the easiest way is actually to see this in operation. So let's just go back across. So over here, what I'm now going to do is I'm actually going to go down. At the moment, we're a manager, and the access check on there, we're allowed to do absolutely everything in here. What I'm going to do is attach a business rule to one of my tasks. So go up to the tasks here, and what should we do? Create order, right? Properties on that, definition, authorization script. Okay, I've got an authorization script here. And it's exactly the script I projected up earlier. Okay, so we OK that one. And OK. So now access check. Oh, I'm on here. Let me just check. We've got managers, we've got Paris users. Hang on, let me just delete that person out actually because they are overriding at the moment. Oops. Delete, which is what I wanted to do. And now I'm going to make Liz an order clerk. So we'll put Liz in there. So Liz is now an order clerk. So access check, she can create and read, but if the amount is over 1,000, she can't do it. Okay, so what's happening is the application is passing the value back for the access check. And we've got a little script that basically is saying if this value is greater than 1,000, then basically you cannot do that particular task. So this is why I said right at the beginning, I call it R squared back, as in rules, role-based access control. Right, so it actually does both components. Okay. Best practice. It's a matter of actually getting the application developers to programmatically populate the authorization store with operations and with tasks. Right? And that should be included as part of the installation. Now, they can either include it in their installation setup, or they can supply a VB script to go along with it. So that's another option. You've got to have very, very good, clear documentation. And this is good anyway. I mean, this should all be very clearly documented. The operation of the tasks, the roles, the authorization policy, the scripts involved. All right? But what we're doing is we're taking this lot out of the code and placing it into a store that's easily manageable. Right? And then the data passed for use with any business rules. You've got to define what data is being passed out. And that obviously will have to be programmatically set. But we can define different parts of different sets of data to come out. And the names used to identify auditable events. So when things arrive in the audit log, we may, I mean, it may be just that actually you have the application name, and then you'll still see the different operations, but we could actually just have the application name that goes in the audit log. And what you want to do is keep the authorization policy as simple as possible, because don't overcomplicate it just because you can. You know, there's lots of nice features in there. If you don't need scopes, don't use them, all right? If you don't need thousands of tasks, don't use them. So you may just go sort of one level. You could keep it really simple, or you could do it as a tiered level operation. And again, which operations are security sensitive, that's up to your original designers to tell you, all right? And the application designer will tell you. And if you're doing the SDL process, as in the software development lifecycle, then that will be part of the initial basically, what you start really with looking at the attack surface, and you look at the risks involved, and we actually need to do some work on actually who's going to attack the system, what are the risks, and so it's a risk assessment that it starts with. Okay, XML store. Problem with an XML store stays here, one location. What about the application over there that needs to use the same store and get the same information? What we wanted to be able to do is actually replicate that store. So we can do a directory hosted store, and we can put the directory either into AD or into Adam. And that will increase your fault tolerance, because if we lose this one XML file, it's gone. If we put it into the AD, it's replicating to every domain controller. The important thing is it's in the domain, not in the forest. Okay? So it's supported in the domain partition. It's not supported in application directory partitions. Requires 2003 domain functionality level for it to work. And what you do is you set in the AD path for the store. So we actually set the store in. And the store connection string that we'll need to set up is ms LDAP, followed by the server name, followed by where it is actually in the Active Directory. And also, the application identity must be able to read the store. So we'll need to change the security on the store, and you can do that through the user interface. It will set up the identity correctly. Okay. If I'm running on a web server, and my Active Directory is over there, and I'm running as network services, right? So my app is running as network services. what identity do I use to access the store on another server? Yeah, it's the computer account, right? And if you're, all the mysteries of that, I will again go into tomorrow. But if you're running as network services on here, and I access something on another computer, and I'm not using impersonation, it's going to use a computer account. So what I have to allow is, if I'm running on Act 1 here, I will have to set the security appropriately. If we use Adam, then Adam is an LDAP directory. Say it's been renamed now. And what we can do is we use Adam when we don't think that changes to the AD that we might want to do are considered safe. I think people are, well, rightly, they're very protective of their AD, changing the schema, adding things in, but I think sometimes overprotective. If it's done correctly, the AD is a great place to put things. But reasons you might consider unsafe, you know, unacceptable changes, security risks, somebody else has got to administrate the store and you're not happy with them coming into your AD. So Adam is actually a really good solution. So we use Adam, and here Adam actually has an application-specific schema. You can do local administration of the Adam store. There's no AD replication overhead. It doesn't put itself into AD to replicate. And we can do server consolidation because we can have multiple instances of Adam running on the same system. Adam can replicate its instances, and we can replicate them across. It is very, very similar to AD replication. And in fact, in 2008, you can do inter-site replication, and you can use sites and services to manage it. All right, that's 2008. But as I say, it doesn't replicate with the AD. If you want to exchange information with the AD, you can use the Adam synchronizer to do it. In terms of partitions, we've got a configuration, we've got a schema, and then we've got one or more application directory partitions. And we basically, when we install the instance, we set up the application directory partition, give it a name that we want to give it, and then it basically builds the instance. If it's the first instance, it's sitting on one particular server. We can then create additional instances, and we replicate them across. The AD schema, Adam schema itself needs to be updated to support AZMan. And to be able to do that, we need to run a little LDIF file in there. So what I'm actually going to do now is actually just install Adam. But let's just, before I do that, just mention the install process. It's a very simple process. You've got to define the network ports, you've got to define the service administrator and the administration accounts, and then the application directory partition name. So let me just go and do that. So I've got a nice reminder coming up. Outlook is obviously not closed underneath, but never mind. OK, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to Start, All Programs, Adam. Now, how does Adam get there in the all programs? It is basically you go into the add remove programs and say add Adam. And having added it, it hasn't created an instance. We create an instance here. So this is a sort of Adam setup wizard. So a unique instance. I don't have something to replicate with. So there's a replica instance we could create. Give it an instance name. Instance 1 will do me nicely. And I'm going to just put in 5389 as my LDAP port and 5636 if I was using SSL. Create me an application directory partition. So I want one of these guys, and I'm going to use in here CN equals Barcelona, just to be topical. And I'm going to say DC equals example. And I'm going to say in here, DC equals com. OK, let me just check I've got that right. Barcelona, DC equals example, DC equals com. OK, so very similar to DC promo, whereas the log files and the log files, the data file and the recovery files, effectively the log files can be stored. Network service, OK, so it's our managed account. And currently, this is the administrator of Adam, is the seller's administrator. Next on there, I've got to import the AZMan LDIF. The schema in Adam is unbelievably simple. It's a really cut down schema. And so I need to put in the AZMan schema extensions in there, next on there. And now what it will do is it will cook away and it will copy the files across. Once it's got all the files across, it will start Adam, and then you'll see it update the schema. So in a couple of moments, it will actually start up Adam. And as soon as it's done that, so it's creating the default, it's updated the schema, and we are ready almost to run on that. Okay, that's it. Adam's there. So how do we get an authorization into Adam? Well, what we need to do in terms of putting the store in there, we simply need to, having done the schema extensions, we actually need to assign an application identity to the reader group in the Adam instance. So that is going to, before you can read the partition. You know, in Active Directory, authenticated users can read practically everything. In Adam, you need to be in the readers group to be able to read something. So we're going to have to put our application pool identity into the readers group in that particular partition. Then we're going to create a store programmatically or via the UI, and then we need to set up the appropriate connection string, and then set permissions on the store itself. So if we actually look at doing that, we can actually just go through that process. So I'm actually going to, in here, add the store into Adam. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get inside Adam in the first place. And the way I'm going to do that is actually I'm going to use Adam ADC-Edit. There's a special version of ADC-Edit that comes with Adam. So Adam ADC-Edit, open it up. So right-click on there, and I'm going to connect. And I need 5389, which is the port I'm coming in on. And I'm going to go in here to CN equals Barcelona. And it was DC equals sellers. Was it DC equals example? Oh, yes, sorry, DC equals example, wasn't it? Thank you very much. I was thinking of a totally different domain, and DC equals net? Was it? Oh, dear, okay. Well, there you are. I'm glad somebody was watching. Okay, so there it is. So what I need to do is I need to go into roles, first of all. There's the reader's role. And in the reader's role, I need to go down to the member attribute. And I need to add in a Windows account, and it's going to be the network service account. And so network service, of course, it's coming in terms of location, it's coming from @1. Okay, so it's coming off this machine. So that's added in. So now the network service account is allowed to read that particular partition. And then the next thing I need to do is create a new container. So we'll create a new object, create a container in here. And I'm going to have a suitable container name, and we'll call it AZ Stores. So AZ Stores in there. Next on there. And we finish that off. Okay, so I will need to modify my web config file, and I'm just going to bring up in here, and actually just to save me typing in, I'm going to have to correct this, of course, because I was dreaming when I put in the other one. So you can help me on this. So it was sellers.example on there. That's the name of the server. So it's MS-LDAP, and what we've got in here is CN equals AZ stores. I'm going to create my stores in a moment, okay? And in here, it was example.com, you said, yeah? Okay, so a bit of collaboration on there is always great. Thank you. Okay, and I've removed the commenting out on there, so I'm going to save that. Okay, the other thing is I need to actually pull this string. I'm going to need this. Copy that. Okay, so now we go back into AZMan itself, authorization manager, new authorization store, Active Directory, knock that out, and pop that in there. So it's going to be called My Store, and we've got the container that it's going to be in there. Okay, so there it is. Okay, right-click on there, new application. I'm going to call it authorization. Okie doke. So that's in there. Let's go into authorization and go in under. Let's just create a role definition in here, just for new role definition. What should we call it? Tiger. Add that. And actually, I won't bother adding. I won't bother adding anything. Just use that as a role definition. And I'm going to come down in here, and I'm actually going to go role assignment, and I'm going to go to Tiger. Okay, that, and so down to Tiger, and let's add Liz in there. So Liz is in Tiger, all right, in that store. Okay, I've updated my web config file, so now my application knows to actually use AZMan. Okay, so what I need to do here is I will actually need to do an IIS reset. So having done an IIS reset, as soon as that's done, we'll just close off this. And oh, yes, that's true. That's true. I don't need to do it anymore. Yeah. So basically, well, yeah. I sometimes find it's not picked it up though. I always do it as a matter of habit now, as an IIS reset. But it should automatically pick it up. Okay, so let's go back in here. So we're going to go to sellers and Liz and log in. So let's crank itself up. Come on, quick. Ah, okay. I know. What have we left out? Just to quickly go into here, we haven't changed the security on here. Properties, security. I want a reader on here. Add in. So network services on here. Okay, and let's just go back to. Let's close it off now. So sellers, and it's Liz again. There it is. Okay, let's do a role check. And she's in Tiger. So we've now got a store sitting inside Adam, which we can access. So in terms of, in terms of actually, it's about building teams. It's about bringing together the developers. It's about bringing together the administrators, bringing together your security specialists to build a proper authorization mechanism into your organization. And I said right at the beginning, I think AZMan is one of Microsoft's best kept secrets, because to build that lot for a developer is going to take a long time. And you won't build in the scopes and you won't build in the business rules to begin with. It will develop over time and therefore lose consistency. And I say, if you want to come back and learn about impersonation and delegation, come back to my session tomorrow. I hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, by all means come down, ask them. Thank you very much for attending, and please don't forget to fill in your evaluations as well. Thank you very much indeed.